So, my name is Logan Jaeren. I founded STEAM4Space a couple of years ago. And STEAM4Space actually is an acronym. You know what STEAM means? For space, but space actually means student projects and activities centered on exploration. So that's kind of my wordplay on all of that. Today, so kind of what my shtick is connecting students to STEAM using patches, the stories of patches, and the storytelling of the mission itself. And this is how I connect students to space, but STEAM in general. So the thing I love about STEAM is that the A in STEAM makes STEM memorable. And so today I'm going to take you all on a journey of discovery. And so I don't have an outline, but what I'm going to share with you over the course of the next 20 minutes is actually what you would experience and what your students would experience. So I think there's no substitute for personal experience in this matter. So my name's Logan Jaeren. I live in Port Orchard, Washington. I am a patch collector, a curator, and a storyteller of the origin story of their design and the mission that they represent and the people, the human interest stories around that mission. And so really, I'm going to lead off with a couple of guiding questions that I want you to think about and ponder. And we'll have an opportunity to have you share out what your responses to these two questions. And if you don't write them down, it's okay. I'm going to show this slide again towards the end. I'm going to just kick it off. We're going to do a kind of a brief history of space and time with mission patches. And so here is at a glance is the U.S. crewed mission programs related to human spaceflight. And the thing I want you to note is essentially the emblems. So with Project Mercury and the Mercury 7, there was no official Mercury project patch or mission patches. They didn't exist. And in fact, they didn't exist until long after the mission that project was ended. And so when you look forward into Apollo, there was 12 emblems, and then Skylab and the space shuttle program, there were 135 missions in space shuttle. And now we actually have two emblems for Artemis. Okay, so here's a quick quiz. And you're welcome to come off mute and actually shout out. In fact, I love that kind of participation. So pop quiz for you. Who was the first person to wear a mission patch in space? Anybody want to just call out a name, take that risk?
Valentina.
You are good, Melissa. It is indeed Valentina. Now, Valentina and Wally Funk have kind of a unique history. So Wally Funk was originally part of the Mercury 13, 13 women who went through the same training program as the Mercury 7, and in fact, they actually outperformed the men. I'm just letting you know. But Valentina was chosen because she was a parachutist. And that was a thing because the spacecraft that came through on re-entry, the astronaut had to actually open up the hatch and jump out and land on the ground with a parachute. And so she had that skill. But this was her mission patch. She has the distinction of being the first human being to fly into space wearing an actual mission patch. So here it is. It was actually sewn on a garment below her spacesuit. So you couldn't really see it. We had to actually wait until the Project Gemini with Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad. And these two men actually were the ones responsible for NASA agreeing to have crew create mission patches. So the very first mission patch that was worn on astronauts that flew into space was Gemini 5. These two men chose the Conestoga wagon to essentially represent the spirit, the pioneering spirit of their space flight, which we were indeed pioneers at that time. The other detail I want to bring your attention to is the astronaut pin, because this is a common element. So both Pete Conrad and Gordon Cooper in this photograph are wearing an astronaut pin. But when astronauts get accepted into the program and they complete their training, they're awarded a silver pin. And when they fly into space, they get a gold pin. And these pins are really small. They're less than a half inch tall and half inch wide. And they're really tiny. I have a couple of replicas of these and actually to better appreciate the size. The very first mission patch to actually have the astronaut pin was Apollo 14. And I want to bring your attention to Apollo 14 here because it really kind of shows off the elements, right? We see the Earth, we see the astronaut symbol as a spacecraft that's launched from Earth. It's on its way to the moon. That was the objective of the lunar landing mission. And then we have the three crew. Now, 9 times out of 10, you can guess who the commander and the pilot is by the placement of the names. So Alan Shepard was the commander, and Alan Shepard, the commander, is always to the left of the pilot, 9 times out of 10. There's always exceptions. So here we have Alan Shepard and we have Ed Mitchell, and Stu Ruza was the command module pilot in this mission. Okay, we are very familiar with this emblem, but do you know what the elements mean? So the circle represents a planet. The stars obviously represents the night sky. We see what seems like a probe, spacecraft orbiting the acronym NASA, which is the National Aeronautic and Space Administration. But then we see this red thing. What is that red thing? Well, it actually represents the first letter of NASA, which is aeronautics. But where did this element come from? Well, actually, before NASA became NASA, it was the National Aviation, what was it? The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics preceded NASA. And as it turns out, that element was a real thing. It was a hypersonic wing, a model that was in a wind tunnel test that somebody remembered that shape. And that's actually the thing that was used to represent aeronautics in the emblem. Now, Apollo has kind of a wonderful gallery of mission patches because the patch shape actually is inspired by an actual thing. It was the command module, the Apollo command module. And as it turns out, all of the command modules were wrapped by this blue wrap to protect the spacecraft, the surface of the spacecraft during transport. And so this was actually the source of inspiration for not only the patch shape, but also the background color. But Apollo 8, in my opinion, Apollo 8 is one of the most perfectly designed mission patches because here we have the number 8, which is the mission destination, and the path, the trajectory from the Earth to the moon is actually the path that the astronauts take. On this particular, it was a circumlunar navigation or mission, and so it has all the very simple elements, but it tells the entire story. Now, here's a story that I'm going to just go out on a limb and say you probably don't know this. So it turns out the Apollo 11 mission doesn't have crew names. And it doesn't have crew names because the crew decided they didn't want to actually take credit for the success or maybe the failure, but they didn't want to take credit for that, the first attempt to land on the moon, because they recognized that there were over 400,000 people across the country, 48 out of the 49, essentially 47 out of the 48 continental United States. The states actually had people working for NASA on this mission. But the thing that actually I love, and one of the things I wanted to share with you is that telling the story about a mission patch can be the hook, the catalyst for essentially taking the story to STEM or STEAM. And I want to point out the fact that the shadows that are drawn that were illustrated in this mission patch are wrong. They were drawn wrong. Michael Collins was kind of the point person for the design, and he admits that he actually drew the shadows incorrectly. So I love the fact that mission patches are not perfect, and this is a great example that I use to help to essentially kick off a conversation about planetary science and orbital mechanics. Where would the shadow have to be in order for it to be correct? And so it turns out Bill Anders taking the Earthrise photo, which is actually rotated 90 degrees, I will just tell you. But this photo actually shows where the shadow should appear on the Apollo 11 mission patch. Now, another fun one is Apollo 13. And Apollo 13 actually shows horses. There's 3 horses for 3 crew members. I actually, in my own personal interpretation, Fred Hayes is the left horse, Jack Sweigert's the center horse, and Jim Lovell is the right horse. And of course, Jim Lovell was ultimately disappointed for not landing on the moon because this was his second and final flight to the moon, and so his head is down. Whereas, admittedly, Jack and Fred were like tourists, and they admit they spent a lot of time looking out the window because that's kind of what they had time on that particular mission. But it also turns out that every crewed mission patch since Apollo 13 never has a horse. In fact, there were attempts to have horses on other mission patches, but were turned down. Apollo 11. So this is the program patch. And if you ever get a chance to see this in person or in a picture, you'll notice that you got the Earth to the moon. It's essentially a double trajectory because it's a mission to the moon and return. The A is the first letter in the Greek alphabet for alpha. The three stars that form the bar of the letter A is Orion's belt. In fact, the entire design is set within the Orion constellation. But the thing I want to point out to you is a little bit something that's hidden in plain sight, and that's actually the profile of Apollo. So the green arrow is pointing at the nose of Apollo, and most people never see that because they're not paying attention to that detail. And these are the things that are the hooks. This is what I love to give as my gift to educators and students is to make them aware of some of the detail, which makes them more curious. It's like a treasure hunt, and the treasure hunt can be the hook. In fact, it is the hook that actually helps to motivate and inspire. I want to know more, and that's actually the whole point of my program, STEAM4Space. This essentially is bringing the meaning, symbolism, and design to be able to surface STEM, which is the bridge that I help to create, and it's the hook that I provide to educators. That being said, we've got Apollo and Artemis. Now, this is also a story I love sharing with students that Apollo and Artemis are actually twins. So Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. And if you look at these two emblems, you'll see that they actually, Artemis's program patch is actually influenced by Apollo's program. You see, but the shape is entirely different. Well, as it turns out that Apollo and Artemis are Greek god and goddesses. They were also warriors, and they were the gods of the hunt, and they used bow and arrow. So the shape of the Artemis patch is that of an arrowhead, which is a kind of an homage to the mythology of Artemis. Then we see the arc. You see that blue arc, and of course, it resonates as being the terminus of Earth as seen from space, but it's also her bow. And so then we see the black letter A for Artemis with the red embroidery that is traversing through the A. That black letter A is also an arrowhead. So if you actually look at the blue arc and the black shape, it forms essentially a bow arced back to be able to shoot an arrow. The red path to the moon is really kind of an indicator that we're returning to the moon, but in a different way. Okay, space shuttle. I love the space shuttle, the whole collection of the space shuttle missions, because every space shuttle, maybe with the exception of the first 4 test flights, although they actually had payloads as well, every payload of the shuttle orbiter that was launched had a bus size payload of STEM. And what I think is kind of unfortunate, and this is kind of my goal, kind of my mission, is to surface the STEM that was in those payloads of the various of the 135 low Earth orbiting missions of the shuttle. So I always start with a great children's book is usually kicked off. The narrative is usually carried by a good illustration. These are the 5 mission patches that represent the inaugural flight of each of the 5 orbiters that flew into space. And if you look at these, you notice a couple of what seems like anomalies. The Discovery STS-41D and the Endeavour STS-49 have tall sailing ships. Tall sailing ships. Why is a tall sailing ship in the emblem for a space flight? Well, as it turns out, all 5 orbiters were named after ships of exploration. So what I love about space is it also looks back and carries forward history. And so the history of the space shuttle orbiters, including Enterprise, which did not fly in space, but it was also named after a ship of exploration. But in this case, it was the NCC 1701 Star Trek Enterprise, which was also a ship of exploration. So even if it was fantasy, which, by the way, Enterprise's name was never Enterprise to start with. The original name was Constitution. and because it was supposed to actually roll out on Constitution Day of 1977. But the Star Trek fans petitioned then Gerald Ford to rename the orbiter Enterprise. So there we go. One thing I love about the international aspect of spaceflight is that Canadian astronauts and European astronauts have this beautiful tradition of actually creating a personal patch that they wear when they fly on their mission. And in this case, this is Canadian Space Agency astronaut Robert Thirsk. And Robert Thirsk partnered with a Pacific Northwest coastal Salish tribal artist, a person who is half Norwegian and half First Nation. And he developed this personal patch. And you can kind of see a semblance of the orbiter in the form of an eagle and a sun, and the motif of the design for this patch is really taking inspiration from indigenous people and communities. And so to give you a little bit of closer appreciation, this is the actual mission patch, which, by the way, was designed by the same artist that created the personal patch for Robert Thirsk. Now, this is the first time that we start to see, especially in the space shuttle missions, we start to see multi-sided polygons. So here's a shape that is not often has an uncommon name. It's a heptagon. It's a seven-sided polygon, and it was chosen in order to conveniently place the names of the crew on the shape. And it actually turns out that Hendricks is the commander for this mission. Why? Because he's up at the top and to the left of the pilot, Kriegel. So yeah, so there's a pattern to this. But what I love about this, when you sometimes you lose some of the detail in the embroidery. So oftentimes you refer back to the graphic art. But what I want to emphasize is that with the graphic art, you can actually see you can see the fine detail in the design, which reveals some hidden secrets. So in this particular patch, you see the orbiter. It's that of an eagle designed with traditional patterns and art forms from the Pacific Northwest coastal Salish tribes. But at the bottom, you see the five bells of the engines of the orbiter, and they all are colored. The rings of those bells are in different colors, and it turns out those five engines form the Olympic rings, and they're colored after the Olympic rings because this mission took place during or just during the year of the Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta, Georgia. And oh, by the way, the tail of the orbiter is touching Atlanta. So again, kind of, these are the I think the hidden figures, the beautiful things that are hidden in plain sight. Another thing I want to bring your attention to is stars. So stars is going to become a recurring theme in this session. These stars form the constellation Dolphinus, and actually a dolphin is a very important animal especially to indigenous people who live close to the water, such as where I live here in Washington State. And the dolphin is essentially a protector of mariners, people who actually travel on the water. So Tim Gagnon is a premier emblem artist and friend of mine. And the thing that I love about Tim is that Tim has designed over 500 emblems, of which 18 are official NASA missions that covers both space shuttle as well as expeditions to the International Space Station. But 31 of his emblems have actually flown in space, including obviously the 18 official emblems. And the thing one of the things about mission patches is that the crew get to decide what their mission patch looks like. It is up to them. It could be anything they want. Now, NASA gets final approval, but whatever the design is actually comes from the crew. And the crew will partner or collaborate with an artist to help bring their ideas to final artwork. Also, the artists can bring their own ideas to help inspire the crew. So it's really a collaboration. Joe Engle, who was the commander for STS-2, and the reason why he's the commander, he is left of Dick Truely's name. Again, STS-2, we got 2 stars, so the stars actually start to represent missions or the mission designation. But take a look at the artwork. This was the very first sketch that Joe Engle drew as he started to think about the emblem for the mission. Now, it is true some artists or some crew members really are They really love the artwork. They really love to be involved in the design of their mission patch. There are other crews who, for which there may be not anybody on the crew who are essentially is artistically inclined, but they have ideas, and that's why the collaboration with an artist. It is also true for educators who essentially bring the activity of for their students to design their own mission patch. And here's an example of that. This was actually created by a third grader. And this was actually created in collaboration with fourth and fifth graders in a GT program, actually in Houston, Texas. And I partnered with the educator at this particular school, and she actually, part of the activities that she does twice a year is essentially is to have students. There's a student contest in which they create a mission patch and vote on the best one. And this particular educator essentially partners with parents, and they actually have the design made into an actual patch. And this is an example of the artwork from a student who collaborated with a graphic artist to bring that artwork to fruition in order for it to be created. Now, why did I share all of that with you? Well, I'm hoping that even if you would stop listening at this very moment, you now have some stories. I hope that I've actually completely changed your perspective on mission patches because they are designed very, very intentionally. But the most important thing, and part of the project, part of my program, STEAM4Space, is getting real patches into the hands of students. That is the transformative ingredient for my program. It creates this this transformative, kinetic, visual, tactile. It becomes this almost this emotional experience for students is to actually touch, to look with their own eyes, to play with the light of the patch, to see how the light reflects off of the embroidery of the patch itself. And that is the transformation. That is the key to the success of my program, is getting patches into the hands of students. And I will tell you, I've partnered with AB Emblem, who is the official patch manufacturer for NASA, and they give me patches, and I thus donate them to educators. And so I will tell you how you can actually request a classroom set of patches for yourself. So that is a real thing. At this time, I have donated over 55,000 patches to over 1,300 educators in 25 countries around the world. And so that has actually only taken place since April of 2023. So not long. And there's more work to do. So here, you can scan this. You can note it. You can watch the recording. This is a link to my website, and I'm going to take you on a quick tour of a lesson plan. So here we go. So when you link out to my site, there is a mission patch lesson in the menu off of the main page as well. And I provided all the resources and a structured learning plan that you can carve up yourself. And the thing, I'll leave you to read the instructions, but the thing I want to point out to you is I've created a presentation. In fact, almost everything you've seen so far is actually included in these presentations. So I've created presentations where you can spend 2 days, 40 minutes each day, or one day for 40 minutes, or one session for 20 minutes, which is a great kind of a lead in if you just are interested in doing a patch design activity for your students. So you can feel free to browse through that. But the thing I want to draw your attention to is the instructions. It's actually a very simple process. Pick one of the presentations, walk through it. There's a point where you're going to stop and you're going to do a design analysis, an activity, hands-on activity. And so that's where I'm going to come back to here. So as I mentioned, there is Google Slides, who I have links to. Here's kind of a gallery of slides in one of the presentations that's available to you. And here we're going to do quick things. So once you receive the patches and you distribute them to your students, part of the program, part of the lesson is a link to a site called missionpatch.info. Now, there are two sites. There's STEAM4Space.org. That is your site. Don't tell your students about that site. Missionpatch.info is really the companion site to be used by your students. And the reason for that site is I have donated 79 different space shuttle mission patches. And this is one of the 79. So I'm just gonna, and there's an activity that if a student who gets this patch wants to understand what the story is, linking out to missionpatch.info is a part of the lesson. Well, they will discover they'll discover their patch, and I'm just going to quickly go out to here. They'll actually the link out to missionpatch.info takes you to the match a patch activity, and once a student has a patch on their hand, the activity is simply go out to the site and find the patch that matches the one that you have in your hand. And let's just actually, for example, let's just say they've picked this patch. So they can click on it, and here is the mission designation, STS-7. They can click on that, and it will take them to a page, and they can actually read the story of what they are looking at. And this is something I've produced using various authoritative sources, including stories directly from astronauts who've crewed on some of these missions, who've shared with me their origin story. So the point here is that I want to to inform the student as to what they are looking at. Now, if you read this description, it doesn't tell you what the name of the orbiter is. It doesn't tell you who the crew is. It doesn't tell you what the mission objectives is. It's really focusing on what am I looking at? And in part of that activity is answering the essential questions. And for right now, all the essential questions for all the 79 patches I make available are the same questions. And I have an answer key for educators, so I have an educator guide that goes along with that. So one of the things that just as as kind of, I'm going to tell you the story about this particular patch because I think it actually is quite transformative, if I hesitate to reuse that term. So what are we looking at? So take a moment to kind of just look at some of the detail. And you can come off mute because I want you, I'd like to hear, what are people seeing? First of all, count the stars. How many stars are there?
6 stars.
Oh, you may have missed one.
Have I missed one? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, yes, I've missed one. Yeah, 7. Yeah.
7, yeah.
There's 7 stars. How many crew?
5, so that's
5.
2.
5. So it's unlikely that the number of stars represents the number of crew. Okay. Do you see a number anywhere in the mission patch?
Yeah, this is 7.
Yeah, number 7.
Oh, and that number 7 is formed by the robotic arm of the orbiter. As it turns out, this is STS-7. So the crew decided to be clever and actually incorporate the mission designation, the number 7, both represented by the stars, but also by forming the number itself using a robotic arm. The other detail that I love is this, is the sun. How many rays do the obvious rays, how many rays do you see?
5.
How many crew members are there?
5.
Well, it might be possible that the number of rays correspond to the number of crew. But there's an interesting little detail. Out of the 5 rays, this one is different. Does anyone right offhand recognize that symbol? It is a symbol for female. And if you look at the other 4 rays, they are the symbol for male. And as it turns out, there are 4 male crew members, 1 female crew member, and that female crew member is Sally Ride. And she was the very first American female astronaut to fly into space. And so that's what the crew decided to do, to kind of be very clever, to kind of pay tribute to Sally Ride and her the first woman to fly into space. Now, I'm going to tell you a story that you'll never find anywhere, and you'll hear it from me, because Charlie Walker, mission specialist Charlie Walker, and Mike Mullane shared the origin story of this patch. But Charlie Walker shared with me the story of the stars. As it turns out, as I mentioned earlier, Discovery, along with the other 5 orbiters, were named after ships of exploration. And Discovery was namesake was the RRS Discovery. Now, it turns out there were actually 3 ships of exploration that had the same name, but RRS Discovery, which stands for Royal Research Ship Discovery, was made in Dundee, Scotland. It was designed to circumnavigate Antarctica, and it was the first time that human beings laid eyes on a penguin. And the crew of that mission, that expedition, adopted an emperor penguin as their mascot. And when the crew of the orbiter Discovery learned of this, they were determined to include a penguin in the design of their mission patch. And when they submitted that design to NASA, the reviewer said no penguin. That's NASA's prerogative, and they don't have to give a reason. But the crew were undeterred, and they challenged the artists that they were collaborating with to include a penguin in their design, and they succeeded. But where is the penguin? Well, if you count the number of stars, it actually counts out to be 12. And it turns out the original mission destination was STS-12 before NASA started playing around with the designations, and that's why we end up with 41D. But if you rotate the patch, and if you look at the stars, it might start to look like something. And as it turns out, when this design was resubmitted to NASA for approval, the reviewer noticed that this design, the revised design, had stars, whereas the original design did not. And so he challenged the stars. What's the story behind the stars? And the point of contact, the representative crew member, told with a straight face, well, that's the constellation Penguinus. And you can only see it from the southern hemisphere. And as it turns out, there is no such thing as a constellation Penguinus. But that was the story that was given in order to get the design approved. Now, it was kind of a part lie, because it turns out that the solution that the artist came up with was to use the 12 stars to form a constellation for which, if you loosely draw the outline of that, it becomes the profile of an emperor penguin. There you go. And so because that story was shared with me, I'm, like I said, I collect, I'm on what's called a story quest. And so I collect these stories, and so I can share that with you. And I will tell you, any student who ends up with one of these patches, or if you end up with that patch in your set, and that story is told, this becomes a truly favorite. And I will tell you, before knowing that story, I kind of overlooked the design of that patch. Now, there are other mission patches that go a little bit further, right? So I've shared with you some aspects of the design that tells a story. It's an interesting story, but it still essentially creates intrigue. Other patches I'll actually go a step further, like this one. So what we actually see is we see the Earth. So this is an introduction to planetary science, where you can, like, this is the Earth, this is Venus, this is Mercury, obviously this is the Sun. But why is there a ship in the design? This was a space shuttle ship. I mean, the orbiter, it was STS-30 was a mission. And as it turns out, this mission was the first time, and it was actually Atlantis. It was the first time that we launched a spacecraft from the space shuttle to explore another planetary body. And it turns out this little speck at the end of the line, you show the trajectory or the path that the spacecraft traveled. And so this spacecraft was named Magellan because Ferdinand Magellan was an early explorer. And Ferdinand Magellan explored the globe on a ship such as this one. And it's a Spanish caravel. It's a type of tall sailing ship. So here we can combine planetary science. The probe named Magellan that actually used radar to be able to explore the surface of Venus. So the story helps to introduce STEM, and as well as actually focusing on history, which is actually an important aspect of human spaceflight and space exploration.
I'm in a.
Do we have a quick question? Because I'm kind of speeding through just to give you kind of a sampling of this program, but I also will provide plenty of time for us to have a Q&A. Okay. Very quickly. So this is STS-34, It is another mission that was flown by Atlantis. It was another mission in which we launched a spacecraft from the space shuttle to explore a different planetary body. And in this case, we have the orbiter, which is a nice introduction to, when people think about the space shuttle is actually comprised of three components. It's actually comprised of the large orange fuel tank, which is one. The second component is the two solid rocket boosters. And the third component is the orbiter or the space plane. And when you combine those three together, that is the space shuttle. But if you're really focusing on just space plane or the orbiter, those are things I work to help to educate, is that we're talking about the orbiter. But when people use space shuttle, yeah, we know what they mean. So in this case, this spacecraft was called Galileo. And Galileo was an ancient astronomer who identified and explored Jupiter. And so this spacecraft was launched to go and explore Jupiter. So that was another way to be able to hook students on the story, be able to introduce them to the topic of Galileo, to be able to also include planetary science and exploration of Jupiter. And as it turns out, my local elementary school that I recently presented to, actually were studying Galileo, the astronomer. So when I brought in this patch and told them, hey, the namesake of this astronomer is Galileo, this was the name of the spacecraft that explored Jupiter, the planet that Galileo was studying. So creating these bridges from story to STEM. Okay, enough of hearing my voice for a brief moment. So here's an activity. It's kind of visual. So what I want you to do is look carefully at these 12 mission patches. And I'm going to give you like 15 or 20 seconds. And what I want you to do is look at the designs of all 12 and start to identify things that look like they share in common. There are some elements in each of the designs that are similar to each other. They may not look exactly the same, but they are kind of, visually representative. So go ahead and look, and there's probably 5 or 6 things that you can pick out here. So take a quick moment and I will kind of look at set the timer, take a close look. I know, that was fast. So, did everyone identify an astronaut pin, or most? Did people discover an astronaut pin? You can come off mute and say hello. Say, yep. I like for this to be participatory.
Yep.
All right. What about the spacecraft, the orbiter?
Yes. Yes.
Nice. Okay. The Earth? Actually, the
Yes.
Earth is represented in all of them. And there's one patch that's harder to see, but because shuttle missions were low Earth orbiting missions, the Earth is actually one of the common elements, especially for in this program. And then we have stars. Now, what I love about stars is stars really doesn't have a single meaning. And hopefully I've given you a little bit of a sampling of that. But let's first, colors, can't forget about colors. So obviously the space shuttle was an American program. Red, white, and blue is our primary colors that you see in emblems related to the space shuttle missions. The other colors are also common colors, and if you look at these collectively, they actually do represent the Olympic rings. And I think that's unintentional, but I think it's quite insightful. So I want you to take another look at these 12, and I want someone to identify an element, a unique element that you're interested in, intrigued about, and for someone to come off the mic, come off mute, and give me the number of the patch they're looking at, and tell me what is it that you see that intrigues you.
Hey, hi, Logan. Can I answer?
Yeah.
Um, well, can I sort of backtrack a little bit? I also wanted to mention a couple of things that I see, like the American flag or the red, white, and blue of the flag in several of them,
Oh yeah.
and especially number one, the the circle. It's like an orbit, like electrons orbit.
Okay.
So I also see that. I mean, it's very pronounced in the first mission patch, but yeah, but it's yeah, I can see it's in like some others, but it's very pronounced in this one.
It turns out that this mission was the servicing mission to fix Hubble. And so what they cleverly
Uh-huh.
did is they cleverly used an optic configuration that Hubble employs, and they incorporated that into the design, and they kind of embedded that obviously in the astronaut symbol. So they've kind of combined those things together. But there was, I actually love this one, the story behind it, because it really, I love Hubble personally, just kind of as a mission. Yeah, no, good call out. So we were talking about stars. So stars has a multitude of meanings, and it essentially is one of those common elements. But to kind of segue from what we just did is the common elements like the astronaut pin, the flag, the national flag, the colors, um, stars, shapes, in cases have also have meaning. But those common elements that you identified, turns out, don't often link the design to STEM. It turns out the unique elements that are not common in most designs are the links from the design to STEM. And so that was kind of pointed out in the comments that were made. Stars have a multitude of meanings, and they can be personal, but they can also be very representative of the mission. And so I want to just share with you some of those common patterns. So STS-7, we learned that the 7 stars represents the mission designation 7. STS-129 has 13 stars in it. And obviously, there's not 13 crew members for that mission. It turns out the 13 stars represent the 13 children of the crew in combination. STS-36, this was purely aesthetic. It was visual. The designer actually loved to have the stars coming off of the American flag that filled the sky. So that was actually an artistic um, take. We see STS-42. We see that there are 6 stars, but they're grouped. So the first group is 4. The second group is 2. 4 and 2. STS-42. So that's another way of representing the mission designation, kind of in a way. And I think I may have lost count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there actually are 7 stars. If you see the yellow one represents our sun, which is a star, obviously. So there are actually 7 stars in total, but there are 6 that are silver. So they also represent the crew, but also the mission designation. STS-69 actually represents the asterism of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, which are a little less defined in a mission patch. And then, as I mentioned, STS-78 had the constellation Dolphinus that represents a dolphin. Here's another one. So STS-26 and 27 are similar. These were the first 2 shuttle missions following the Challenger accident. And so the number of stars in that design is essentially a tribute and a memorial to the lost crew of Challenger STS-51L. STS-35, one crew member in particular, Hoffman, his son is named Orion and actually wanted the constellation Orion to appear in the design. And as I mentioned, this is a collaboration, so the entire crew have to agree to the design or for it to make it happen. Okay. I had the privilege of actually attending. I showed you the design that a student created that was made into a mission patch. I visited this school and presented. I love this quote, which is misquoted to be JFK or John Kennedy, but it turns out Jacqueline Kennedy is the authoritative source according to the John F. Kennedy Library, Presidential Library. I love this. One person can make a difference, and everyone should try. I do this for free. You can request a presentation from me, virtual or in person, depending on where you're located. I am happy to essentially present and share stories about mission patches that cover all, that essentially touch all of these topics. Um, I'm going to share with you photos that were taken on Wednesday. This was a visit to a kindergarten, to a local elementary, in which I had the privilege of having 44, holding the attention of 44 kindergartners for an hour. The three educators said it couldn't be done. Yes, it can. I held their interest for an hour. And afterwards, they wanted to design mission patches. And in fact, what I did is created an activity to essentially take create a mission of sending hot pizza to the International Space Station. And I stood at the whiteboard and I essentially had them design it for me. I guided them a bit, but essentially we came up with a design, an original design that represented uh, pizza being delivered to the International Space Station. And they chose three toppings: pepperoni, olive, and basil. I didn't see that coming, right? So the pepperoni became stars, the olives became planets, and the basil became comets. I would like to think that I completely changed these kids' perspective on mission patches, but more importantly, I gave them stories and I gave them the I inspired them to think about these stories and to now to imagine themselves on a mission. And they took that, and immediately during when I left, I heard that they had sketch time after my visit, and they were free to sketch anything they wanted. It was part of an activity that they do. And without exception, they all decided that they wanted to create a mission patch that's kind of represented who they are and where they would like to go. And that is the hook. It has the hook I offer, the stories, the patches, the lesson, the activities, and the ability of actually bringing me into your classroom to help share these stories with them. Essentially create that spark of curiosity. And it turns out to have a lasting transformative impact on students, both kindergarten through adult. And in addition, I want to offer to you the opportunity to invite Fred Hayes, Apollo 13 astronaut, uh, NASA research pilot, commander of the first space shuttle orbiter Enterprise. We do a space STEAM education program for which there is a Q&A, an hour-long Q&A with Fred, that the students get to develop their own questions to be able to ask Fred. So they have this opportunity to engage with an actual astronaut who's been to the moon and back and has stories to tell. And so that is available. And again, we don't charge. So with that, this is this is a link to my site. This turns out to be my personal patch that was designed by Tim Gagnon, who I showcased earlier. And with that, with the time that we have, I want to open this up for conversation. Feel free to answer or respond to the guiding questions I presented at first, or ask me anything.
Right, Logan. You mentioned that the very first mission didn't have a mission patch, and maybe I missed this. Maybe you mentioned it and I missed it. So, what was the real sort of thinking to design a mission patch? And then it sort of took off after that.
So actually, the source of inspiration for mission patches comes from the military, because branches of the military, squadrons, army units, and so forth, naval detachments, all had an emblem that represented either the branch of service, but more specifically, the group of members of the military within a particular group. So that actually was the catalyst even for Pete Conrad and Gordon Cooper, because they came from the military and they wanted to have patches of their own. Prior to that, there were very few. The notion of mission patches really wasn't a thing even for cosmonauts early on. Valentina Tereshkova was an exception in that regard. And that was kind of her own individual effort. It's kind of like a personal patch, like Robert Thirst's personal patch for STS-78. Um, it turns out there was a time in which it was illegal for the public to own patches that represented NASA patches. There was a period of time in which you could not purchase these patches. And NASA acquiesced, and it's like, okay, this is in the public realm of the public domain. They're available. People can make them, and people can buy them. And as it turns out, even with Project Mercury, the very first American space uh, program with a Mercury 7, there was actually an emblem that was designed for each of those missions, but they were in the form of a coin, and those coins or medallions were carried by astronauts into space, but they were not made into patches until the Gemini program, patches could be purchased by the public. And it turns out the pressure of patch collectors was the influencer of creating patches from those original medallion designs.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
yeah.
Hello, sir. I would like to share my enthusiasm with what you have been presenting and everything that you do. I mean, your passion is so nice to see. Your work with the children and with your students. It's so nice. Thank you very much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Um, I want to briefly introduce you my story so that you understand where I come from. So I'm coming from poor Greece and also a poor family from Greece. And education about space and the stories about space exploration didn't reach us at school, right? So we had myths in our heads and ideas that okay, maybe it was part of the Cold War between the US and Russia, maybe it never happened. So it was very interesting, and I recently, 8 years ago, I moved to the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a much bigger economy. It does have an astronaut as well, which I met at some point as well.
Yeah,
And I met one person from the US NATO fly team, let's say, right, the Air Force. And
yeah.
they told me that the moon is easy. And it was very impressive for me that, okay, how can you be so confident that the moon is easy? And then I started learning about it more and more. And now it's been the third time that I'm joining this meeting also. It's very interesting, like to meet people who are into space. My question is for you, uh, how have you been experiencing this distance to the knowledge about space? Like, have you been traveling around the world and seeing people being completely unaware about everything that has happened so far? So, like,
Yeah, well, I haven't been doing much international travel. I've been doing a lot of virtual Zoom sessions in Portugal, in France, in South Africa, Ecuador, Australia. So there's places around the world where I've joined them virtually, shared these stories with their students. Uh, Oftentimes, it's a joint session with Fred Hayes because they've essentially gone through the program, developed their questions, and they're going to ask those questions of Fred. What I've discovered around the world is yes, there is that just the thought of space um, can be a very foreign subject. There are indigenous communities in Canada and in different parts of Europe, in fact, and in South America, where just the notion that that there is a space station that has been orbiting the Earth with people on board continuously since the year 2000. Now, obviously not the same people, but the kids that are being taught today in elementary school have never known a world for which people were not orbiting the Earth. And so even just introducing that idea that, I could get in my car and if I could drive vertically, 4.5 hours, I could arrive at the International Space Station.
does it take that short time to actually reach the ISS with SpaceX mission or so?
Absolutely. 4.5 hours.
Okay.
If I could drive straight up, I could drive in 4.5 hours. I could rendezvous with the International Space Station. And so the idea that space is out of reach is something that I'm bringing the stories, but I'm also bringing the cultural influence, the cultural relevance, which is incredibly important. And I told the story of STS-78 that actually was influenced by indigenous people. And we can go everywhere in the world and have that conversation with different cultures around the world and look at how space and the knowledge of space can be uh, explored and influenced by people around the world. And that's kind of that's why I love this particular approach is it's physical, right? It's tangible. It isn't just looking at an image. It's actually holding something and having an experience. And that experience is what I think lowers the barrier of entry, makes it possible to be able to transform the experience um, very easily and simply. So storytelling and the oral history of space is something that I think it's underutilized. And all of the, I have a network now of over 1,300 educators, and I consistently get affirmation that these are the stories, this is the way that they actually capture the imagination and spark the curiosity in their students, is story, and then creating that connection. Thank you for sharing your. By the way, Greek mythology, especially in NASA human spaceflight programs, is incredibly influential. So again,
I
we can
see
go.
that. I find it interesting. Now,
Yeah,
I'm also giving a course. I'm in Maastricht University now in the Netherlands as a lecturer in the School of Business and Economics, and I'm also giving a course in a summer course on the new space economy. Actually, the
yeah,
development of the industrialization, like the privatization of space exploration. So,
very nice. Thank you for sharing your story.
yeah, I don't know if I could contact you like through an email if you would like to join our classes. They
I've
are adult students.
Yeah, I've posted my email and a link to my website in the chat. Um, but it's, steam4space.org, and you can find my
No.
email there too.
Thank
Um,
you very much because it's
you're very
very
welcome.
inspiring. Your presentation is very inspiring, and I really like the hooks that you are mentioning because they spark the curiosity of the others to be like, okay, and then what happened? And then let me search in Wikipedia about this
Right,
mission and
right.
the other mission. And Hoffman, for example, who has Hoffman also gave the course in Introduction to Aerospace and Engineering.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah.
it's
Well, and
interesting.
I'm taking the origin story of the design of mission patches, which was, I selfishly asked that question during earlier in our session during the astronaut panel. Uh, but what I'm also carrying forward, so my Steam for Space program is evolving. So one of the things that I'm evolving to is creating more of that very deep research into this topics of STEM. So exploring the science and the technology and the engineering and the mathematics related to the payloads of the space shuttle that are oftentimes revealed through the design of the mission pouch. So more to come.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Do we have time for, I think, maybe one more question before we close this out?
Logan, I wanted to ask that the colours that you showed, should all the mission patches stick to that colour scheme, that colour
No,
palette?
no. I work with, I did a professional development session with over 800 educators in the country of Nigeria. And, color should be inspired by, should have meaning. It should have relevance to both the culture as well as representation. Now, as it turns out, NASA crewed missions include international astronauts, both from Russia and Europe and Canada. And so that influences the color scheme. Yeah. No,
Thank you.
color, you shouldn't be bound by color. I'm just showing you that was kind of the most common colors used in the space shuttle program. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's really interesting that the astronauts get to sit with the artist and have this brainstorming session, and
Yeah.
then, they come up with something.
Oh, and by the way, the artists do not get paid.
Oh, that's a shame.
Well, I think if you were to ask the artist who designed something that now is a forever icon of a particular mission, and their icon now is always associated with that mission that flew into space, almost without exception. In fact, I haven't had an exception. Everyone said, no, it was an honor to be able to create something that now
That's
forever
their glory
represents
to
it.
have their work seen.
Right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I kind of want to call Melissa Sleeper out. because she actually is a recipient of patches and has been involved in my particular program. So thank you, Melissa.
Oh, Melissa's muted,
I know. It's okay.
but she does so much great stuff.
Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, by the way, so one of the things that actually, just as a closing remark, I have learned over the last 2 years of donating patches out to various educators. I've had a music teacher in Wisconsin, Lisa Werner, who took the patches and had her music teacher and music students pick a patch and create original music inspired by the patch. That blew my mind, right? I've had other, written works and other things, and so it's amazing where this can take the journey and the trajectory that students can take just by holding something in their hand and imagining the limitless possibilities.
Well, Logan, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the recording, but thanks for coming and sharing everything that you shared.
You're welcome.
There's such cool stories, and I'm grateful we got an opportunity to capture them here today, and we'll have an opportunity to share them in the future. And thanks to everybody who spoke up and participated. Awesome to have you guys here as well. Definitely share this stuff widely with your friends and colleagues and students.
Yeah.
But with that said, I'm going to bring this to an end, and we've got a full hour break right now. This is lunchtime in California, but wherever you are, go be human. And we'll see you guys in an hour for the afternoon sessions.